little bit of a coincidence here, and Carl is where you get the name Charles. So we'll count Charles as the same as Carl. Okay. So the origin of Carl comes from the Western Norse meaning of freeman. And for those familiar with the Half-Life franchise, Freeman, Mr. Freeman, comes in quite a bit here as far as the secrets of the stones are concerned. And this really goes back to how Pete and I got collaborating in the first place with the Shaver Mystery and my own contribution with the works of Stanislav Zukowski. So I've already said Charles and Carl quite a bit here. And just to recap how many Carls I've previously mentioned here, we got Sagan, Jung, you hear those two a lot, so no big surprise there. Kellner, Reichenbach, Spiesberger, Haushofer, Germer, and von Eckharthausen. So that's 8 Carls so far there. So it's very coincidental. Just follow the Carls, and apparently that is the key to this research here.
Okay. Follow the Carls.
It's got to be something to it. So doing this research, people often ask me, why do you know so much about this? People always want to know, what's in it for me? This doesn't make sense. How does this relate to anything? And I normally just tell them it makes sense because you've never heard of it. But just because I know something you don't doesn't make me right either. So I'm prepared tonight to give you some real gems here, pun intended. And this all stems from my idea of what I have dubbed Neolithic shamanism. And it is an ideology that transcends gender, race, and creed. And unlike most people, I play Minecraft in real life. I'm not data mining at the behest of cryptocurrency to wage cyber warfare. So I've been working on writing a little book called, what did I name it? I named it Spiritual Warfare and the Countercultural Phenomenon. And I got a little preface to my book here, so I will read the preface. It says, Hermeticism and occult doctrines are privy to few, for fear of chastisement or pain of death. I discern spirituality from mass hysteria. To master sacred tradition, ritual, and symbolism, as it has been thwarted and adulterated from our now guildless practitioners. I seek to manifest forces of nature while heralding scientific innovation to advance the human experience, challenging the paradigm of accepted reality to rid folklore, public consent, and consensus from the burdens of pseudoscience, disinformation, and superstition, to illustrate how eccentric and enigmatic figures have influenced popular culture by way of obscurity and paroxysm. So that is my answer to people that ask me, the normies, why do you know so much about this? And you probably haven't heard the word paroxysm, but in essence, a paroxysm are fads and trends as the latest ritualistic form of control. Take what trends we got going on. ASMR for the most relevant example. And there are more often than not allusions or symbolic references towards mythology, usually Greek, and they are everywhere. Take Arco AMPM, and they have a patent for reflecting radio waves from the ionosphere. And Arco comes from Archimedes, or the owl. And day and night with AMPM, the sine wave of the moon and the sun, which may or may not come into play later here. And all of this is referred to as euhemerism, the belief that classical gods were based upon historical events. And I can think of a word for just about everything, if not just make one up and pull it out of a hat. So there are 2 forms of alchemy, physical and spiritual. And you don't gotta see the world in black and white, but one who transcends both by manifesting their intent upon reality is performing a transmutation, magic or wizardry in essence. So okay, let's get into the alchemy and mineral stuff here. Several hundred years ago, a variety of barite from Italy was found to phosphoresce upon heating, and it was called bologna stone from its point of origin. These ores contain barium sulfate. It was prized by alchemists who studied mercury sulfide through reddish ores known as cinnabar. In a chemistry class nutshell, rocks contain ores of minerals which are composed of elements made up of atoms. A gem is a precious mineral in the form of a crystal, and a jewel is not necessarily of value but possesses spiritual and metaphysical significance. Get to this later.
Is this a primal?
So, I would say so.
Because it goes back so deep into ancient history, people's admiration and value of these jewels and gems. You know, I mean, does this go back to the times like of people first starting mining? You know, like
It's probably even simpler than that. They probably said, "Oh, hey, this is shiny and pretty, and I can make something nice out of this." It was probably something a little more useful at some things, or they discovered, that, or maybe they thought it was magic if you held a crystal up to the sun or something.
Right, you start smashing certain rocks together and weird stuff happens. Exactly. So let's see.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
like, can you imagine being like the first caveman to stumble out and find a rock or something that was like a geode, and they just broke it open, like, oh my god, it's magic.
Right?
Yeah.
oh, you wouldn't know what to make of it.
No. You have no idea that, yes, it's a crystallization process, etc., etc.
It's magic.
So as far as a crash course in geology and mineralogy, I find that studying stone quarries and antediluvian religions comes hand in hand.
Freak.
So, in particular, hematite stone tools
Like
and the use of psychometry can be utilized. And psychometry, a quick Wikipedia search here, is channeling information or token reading through information or artifacts. And mainstream anthropologists fear this ability, and by use of the Army Corps of Engineers, they cover stuff up along with the Smithsonian Institute and the United Nations under the guise of humanitarian rights, and usually giving out a Nobel Peace Prize. Take caprolite or fossilized dinosaur turds, for an example. And there's no validity behind scientists with no ancestry or heritage that make claims of, discovering certain artifacts from areas that they really have no right. Gets on my nerves. Like, anytime something comes up as far as anthropology is concerned, they either just call it a new species, or everyone wants to have something named after them. It's just a big intellectual pissing contest. So anyway, yeah, it irritates me. I try not to let it, but I digress. So, in geological layman's terms, and in order to do my own geology professor, Mr. Layman, that was his name, so layman's terms here, do Mr. Layman some justice. You have batholiths, which contain granite, andesite, gabbro, and rhyolite. This is basic geology, and a good starting point for alchemy and mineral enthusiasts. These rock specimens are known as igneous intrusives and plutons.
It's like rhyolite's like is that volcano? What was it? Is that volcanic or something?
Yeah, rhyolite is volcanic. It's kind of reddish.
Okay.
Definitely. But yeah, you're on the right path there.
Okay.
you'll see it kind of like in like subalpine, kind of like transition places. Anyway, these
Heck, you know, I like
rock specimens,
I like rocks too.
we like
when
rock.
you start combining sedimentary rock and you're dealing with phosphorus and sulfur, you start looking at formations known as waccoliths. And a waccolith is kind of like, if you blow up a diagram of one, it looks like a mushroom, pretty much underground, with magma running through it. And you'll find copper and galena, which is lead sulfide. Galena is a mineral, which is lead sulfide. So there are other ores, such as sphalerite, which is zinc sulfide. And when struck with rock or stone, these minerals create a form of triboluminescence, emitting flashing of orange lights.
Okay.
And this relates to what is known as the piezoelectric effect, which will come into play later here, just depending on how far I get down these notes. I've got like 4 or 5 pages of notes here, so we'll see just how far we get. But anyway, it gets more complex with metamorphic rocks. And these are known as conglomerates, such as breccia. And they usually have sea critters that are fossilized in them. So you got trilobites, ammonites, and crinoids in that order, as far as oldest to youngest. And these are known as index fossils, and they are used to date certain formations. And you can perhaps find these in outcrops or formations near lapiliths and alluvial fans. And a lapilith is a little bit different than a waccolith. It's just not, it's like an above ground mushroom rather than like an underground, like direct from the source magma flow. And an alluvial fan is like, just like a washout, pretty much. And these are all very antediluvian terms here.
Drink.
Technically, they're called, this is from the Holocene era, but, I throw that one in there, while you can. So, sediments of sulfur interact with mercury and sometimes volcanic ash or tuff with aluminum forms clay. And this is a process known as hydrolysis. So these barite and cinnabar ores are the origins of the philosopher's stone. Back on the alchemy track here. And this is sought after for the conversion of lead to gold, so we're told. Cinnabar is also known as dragon's blood, and mainstream skeptics claim that these alchemical findings were in vain, while the contributions are undeniably substantial to modern chemistry. So the interaction of sulfur and phosphorus between molten rock and sedimentary rock is the takeaway here. So there's your geology homework if you want to be geology. There you go. You just got a minor in geology there. So alchemy must be relegated to the relationship between consciousness and matter, with correspondence and respect to the elements, or elementals, dare I say.
Hey.
Astronomy and even plants are relevant considering the Bonnet's manuscript of Turkish origin, and this goes back to the Cygnus Sirius mystery at large. Therein lies a recurrent theme, the debate between metaphysics and spirituality. So the goal of alchemy is instead a metaphor to appease the powers that be, or use antediluvian man to go mine your gold for you.
Shit-faced.
I don't know how many edibles I ate, but they're 5.
Uh-oh. Whoa.
It's
Correct.
somewhere between 2 5s and 4 5s.
Someone was showing me there's like edible roulette. I don't know who showed me that the other day. Don't know if that was you or not. Well, there's like a random like gummy in the bag that if you eat it, it's like way too strong. It's like, here you go.
That's fun.
Maybe I
That sounds
saw
like
that
something I'd do.
on a post somewhere. I don't know. Anyway. So, the magnum opus of alchemy endeavored to find the prima materia, and that is a primordial substance to explain the spiritual and physical origins of the universe. So now we're getting really philosophical here.
There you go.
New Age mystery schools and Gnostics believed Sophia is the transgressor of the physical and spiritual, and this leads us back to the process known as transmutation. And this is the ability to manifest reality through the conveyance of inanimate material by way of interaction with the etheric. So have I lost anyone here? Let's take a little step back.
Yeah.
Basically, the ability to make something out of nothing. Lots of symbol, sigil magic involved. And I'm trying to relate this back to like everything I talked about with runes, like the Sephiroth. Yeah, we'll get to that later. Exactly. Someone in the chat's on my level here.
Good.
So very good, very good. We can move on. Very good. So, Mary Ann Atwood, whom I've mentioned previously, states in Suggestive Inquiry into the Hermetic Mystery, astronomical findings are an alchemical proof of concept. For a quick example, gold has been traced to supernovas and other rare elements and to neutron stars,
Oh wow.
which brings about the old adage of Hermes Trismegistus or Thoth and the Emerald Tablet, as above, so below.
That's interesting.
So a whole new meaning there. And I'd like to take you.
This is my man right there. Like,
Oh yeah, he's super antediluvian.
he is. He's like the cornerstone that all this hermeticism is built on. You know.
Drink again.
That's what they say. The cornerstone that fell from heaven.
Wow.
Or no, that's not that. It's the stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. There's another one there. All interrelates. So my take on it all is that certain public personas play roles, and that is why celebrities are referred to as the stars.
Stars.
When you have a fallen star or a shooting star, what you are witnessing is ritual sacrifice. Be a good sport is the phrase.
Take one for the team.
Yeah, you can think of all sorts of little clever little quips and adages, and it just goes on and on and on. Lots of plays on words and how language interrelates. Yeah, it just all goes back to the same stuff. Goes back to the runes, goes back to human biomagnetism. But anyway, moving on here. In the most basic principles of alchemy and paganism, you have a triple figure, or triple godhead, a love triangle. Most prolifically, the Babylonian trinity of Tammuz, with his wife Ishtar, and Nimrod, who famously made the Tower of Babel, and Semiramis. Yeah, Semiramis, I can't talk right now, is interesting because Semiramis is sometimes referred to as a man, perhaps due to their own sexual exploits. They're sexploits.
Sexploits.
Yeah, I like to call it sexploits. It's all about vibrations. We'll get to that later, Resident Alien. Yes, it is all about vibrations. So, this triple god figure is normally referred to as either the divine masculine or the divine feminine, And the Babylonian pantheon is very similar to the Egyptian pantheon as far as alchemical symbols go. You have a swan, a peacock, and a dove. A lot of times the dove can be the Holy Spirit, sometimes symbolized as. And with the peacock and birds in general, the males have the pretty feathers. I'll get more on this later because I find that cosmology or cosmetology, there's a reason these two words sound so alike, cosmetics, are related to alchemy as a form of control. And you also have the three Norns of Norse mythology, which I cover extensively in my own videos on my feminine. The three Norns are Urd, the Norn of the past, Skuld, the Norn of the present, and Verdandi, the Norn of the future. And sometimes you can see this as like a lion, puma, or like a leopard, spotted, or like a jaguar. But anyway, moving on, in alchemical terms, it is known as body, spirit, and soul, with body being represented by salt, or sodium chloride, halite crystals, they're called. Spirit is mercury, and your soul is sulfur. Sulfur is pretty easy to memorize there. So, this is the difference between spirit and soul. Soul being a reflection of your purpose. Soul, sulfur. Thus, if you have sold your soul, you have abandoned your purpose in life to either that of a greater or lesser power. Whereas spirit can be viewed as your mind and your free will, if it is still free. And yeah, you can take Odin as the masculine triple god figure with his two ravens, Hugin and Munin, being mind and memory. Spirit and soul are very interrelated, but more often than not, one soul is in order to serve your ancestors, your sole purpose. Thus, you have the two trees of life, one masculine, the Irminsul, and the other feminine, the Yggdrasil, or the two trees of life. Not necessarily life, but just the two trees in the Garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. So back to Marianne Atwood, she states that the flaw in human spirit is that it lacks intelligence. Woman, stressing the importance of working with light as a form of spiritual alchemy. So she says, do not seek the light. Don't look for light workers. Don't seek those that claim to put light on others, no matter how benevolent the cause. So the use of, say, psychedelics is not the path to enlightenment, but it opens the door for you to be manipulated and to have your would-be chakras or energy centers compartmentalized. So there is a reason people refer to their genitalia or root chakra as their family jewels.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're dealing with organized crime syndicates, mobs, or gangsters. Think about the word gangster. A gang of stars. And this brings a whole new meaning to a bunch of phrases, like a diamond in the rough, all that glitters is not gold, in reverence to the origin of these precious metals, dead stars, dead celebrities. And this is what you're playing. Like, let's say you're playing Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. You're in the hot seat. You're answering a bunch of questions. If you're a winner and you're famous, you're in the spotlight. So yeah, it is all play on words.
Yep.
So back to alchemy. The Polish alchemist, Michael Sindavogius, was the first to coin this term in his writings, as far as I know and have discovered. The whole point here being that Atwood understood in order to properly obtain the light, you do not seek it out. but transmute it by instead entering the darkness or the void. There's a lot of sexual implications there. Go into the void. Do not see light. Giggity.
Giggity.
Giggity, giggity. So, a lot of critics of Atwood correlate her to the mesmerist movement and just, they put her down as a quack and as a kook, but she's actually pretty smart. Because Atwood proclaims mythological deities were exemplified heroes based upon actual living people, with their exploits being embellished. And this goes back to what's called ehumerism. I think it's an old Greek philosophy. It's ehumerism, but I haven't really looked into like the actual original Greek philosophy of it. I just know it's called ehumerism. Just throw out the buzzwords here. But as previously stated, most knowledge of alchemy comes from the Emerald Tablets. Mercury can be known as Odin, and Hermes Trismegistus, otherwise known as Thoth. There's a lot of names you can throw in here. You have John D.
He wrote the Emerald Tablets.
Right.
For those of you who are unaware. Yeah. I'd like the channeled information about that. I think that's really compelling stuff. But I'm sorry to interrupt you. Please go ahead.
Yeah. I'm talking about, we know quite a bit about him. John D., who discovered the Enochian language, the language of Enoch,
Yep.
by way of divination. He was scrying. This goes back to like our very first stream we did with one another, and it wasn't very well received, but I didn't really have my facts in order, and I kind of just winged it. But anyway, back in the Middle Ages, you could not look at a stone statue without a handheld mirror made from a guild of scryers. So modernly, you have the Temple of Astarte, headed by Carl Poke Runyon. So we got a Carl here. So
Wait, why couldn't you look at it without a mirror?
it was just considered taboo.
So you
Bad
had, to
luck.
look at you had to look at the statue in the mirror? Is that what you're saying?
You'd have like a mirror, and you're
Uh-huh.
supposed to be looking at the statue like over your shoulder.
Ah, okay.
Like
You couldn't
the
look
old
directly at
saying,
it. Okay.
why do you have to throw salt over your shoulder for good luck? It goes back to alchemy.
Ah,
That's your body. So like you're
okay.
something about having to look and venerate a statue, you'd have to use that mirror over your shoulder in order to do so, or it was bad luck. I just kind of pieced that together here.
Well, you have to look at Medusa.
Right. Anyway, Carl Poke Runyon and the Temple of Astarte is a modern example of some of these scrying practices, and he utilizes what is known as a psychomantium. And this is the use of mirrors in sensory deprivation and enforced ritualistic initiation. So this is a lot of like people that realize that there's like indoctrination and like programming stuff going on, and they're using these own techniques for their own good rather than use them against other people.
Okay.
Not a lot of people know about this stuff anyway. Not for the normies, but it is important to mention Gustav Fechner again, who I talked about, I believe, with the nervous system and the occult. To recap, Fechner experimented with sun gazing, and like John D., he began seeing auras and entities.
I bet.
So Gustav Fechner was the father of psychophysics, and that's the effects of various stimuli on the nervous system. So you could mention the orb of Dendera at the Temple of Hathor in Egypt. And it is also important to mention Escheron in Greece, near the Temple of Delphi, realm of the eldest of oracles, perhaps dating to older antediluvian Sanskrit origin.
Mission objective detected.
So the Greek Omphalos is a lingam-like monument dedicated to the oak tree. And this relates to ancient druids and the Ermin Sul. It's like a pillar of heaven. It's like a pedestal. And the Ermin Sul can be related to the Tiwaz rune of the Elder Futhark. The word itself has its origins here, saying will activate a crystal. So I've heard. Now I don't know if you guys want me to do this or not. I have a quartz crystal here. And by utilizing what is known as the piezoelectric effect, I could use my Geiger counter and I could go and activate this crystal and produce an electrical charge and prove it using my Geiger counter to show that there is in fact a heightened amount of electrons flowing through it by way of my very voice.
Do it.
We'll see. We'll see. Then when we get a little more intoxicated, and we'll pull out the fun toys.
Oh.
I gotta put it together. I got a
Okay.
I got a 9-volt battery I gotta put on it with Russian technology from our good friends at eBay. But we'll see. We'll see how far I get. I tried it the other day, and I don't know if it was just like a placebo effect, but I did get a little bit of spike in parts per million.
It's very small, though.
But anyway, alchemy in this sense is etheric. It is the bonding agent between the soul and physical, conjoining the divine with the lowly. So, Michael Sinovogius nearly discovered oxygen when he believed a substance known as phlogiston was responsible for the combustion of all matter. Anton Lavoisier disproved phlogiston theory through the sublimation of calx. So what he did was he turned iron oxide into a combustible gas. And Lavoisier stated that no matter was ever lost. As far as modern chemistry is concerned, this is known as the law of equilibrium, which is also mentioned in the Pythagorean equilibrium, that everything is kind of like a pendulum. So Lavoisier was most likely confusing hydrogen and oxygen with one another. I think he was it's like a really basic chemistry experiment. You make a gas and you put it into and light it on fire, and hydrogen. But anyway, gases that are said to be noble are unreactive, the most basic being helium, whereas gases that are inert are used in loving processes, which may or may not come into play, just depending on how far I get here. But as far as spirituality is concerned, the light is an etheric agent. Properly obtain the light, you do not seek it out, but transmute it by entering the darkness or void. Marianne Atwood believed that mythological figures were real beings that were deified into alchemical personifications. Thank you, Marianne Atwood. And this goes back to what I was saying about runes and the human nervous system. So you have the first documented case of schizophrenia with James Tilley Matthews due to the pursuits of alchemy. And this is where the phrase bedlam comes from, because it's the asylum James Tilley Matthews stayed at. He believed he was being antagonized by the French government by a steampunk-esque machine he called the Heirloom, otherwise known as an influencing machine. Now I love this story because it's so weird and creepy. But Through the remote application of various noxious gases and fumes, he basically thought he was being tormented with mentally. And ultimately he proved that he was sane, and yeah. James Tilly Matthews, the first schizophrenic. So, likewise, you have the two founding fathers of modern chemistry, the Frenchman Antoine Lavoisier and the British Joseph Priestley, and they were both executed on the same day for their heretical and treasonous acts. James Tilly Matthews was a correspondent to both Lavoisier and Priestley. And perhaps far older cases of inadvertent but self-induced insanity can be known. The term mad as a hatter, as we all know, is due to exposure to mercury. However, there were other trades older than hatters. So let's skip forward about 100 years here. You have Pierre Curie and Marie Curie, and they discovered radium in 1898. So you have the Radium Girls in 1917, and this is a horrible talking point to tell your 1950s housewife to stay in the kitchen. A bit of a sidestep here. However, you had a man and his wife doing scientific experiments together. I can imagine whatever else stuff they were doing in their home time, but Pierre and Marie Curie performed seances as scientific experiments. So in reality, the chauvinism hadn't set in yet, but the suffragette movement had just begun. And women were being tested on with industrial byproducts and still do to this day. The tax bracket increased as the military-industrial complex wasn't even a term that was coined yet. No one really even knew about this impending danger. It wasn't on the public radar. So like these radon girls had this like glow-in-the-dark radon, and they would like put it on their nails, and they weren't told that it was radioactive. Yes, and they're like putting it on their teeth, which isn't smart on their part. So I think there was like a lawsuit that they lost out on, but because they were like so reckless with it, they lost out. Like a lot of them went bald. And yeah, this is a horrible situation. The Radiant Girls. But there you go, a very old example of cosmetology being run awry due to alchemy. So, most are familiar with the works of Marconi, Edison, and Tesla. Charles is a Carl. Charles is a Carl. Charles Proteus Steinmetz is one name that gets swept under the rug. Steinmetz was a disfigured man with dwarfism, and I associate dwarves with Saturn and technology in a positive light, so to speak. The name Proteus coming from Greek mythology, from the shape-shifting sea hermit figure. So you got a hermetic figure, Proteus, and this is all very antediluvian here. And you can also bring up St. Elmo's Spire or plasma orbs here. This relates to the Omphalos. But Steinmetz, being the German word for stonemason, Steinmetz, like Leon Harriman, was under surveillance by the U.S. government for being a socialist spy. This being years before the rise of Nazi Germany. Steinmetz was considered an anti-fascist and wrote to Stalin personally. He was considered a German nationalist, and he helped patent Tesla's technology into an electronic car. Steinmetz contributed to the first electronic motor mechanisms and modern machinery. So you have hysteresis, and the Steinmetz equation used for closed-loop feedback circuits. And this, I could go into this, but I'm just going to have to move on because I don't want to bore you all. But
Yeah, I feel like don't interrupt and be snacking on mic.
yeah, I mean it's a lot of ground to cover here, so
I want to see the experiment.
you want me to say out of crystal for the
Yes,
people?
I do. Do I get back up?
Yeah, I'm interested in the crystal aspect the most. Like,
Yeah.
Oh man, I shouldn't have even mentioned that. What have I done?
Why? That's great.
Okay, we're moving on. So, Steinmetz had a lot of views relating to theosophy. And here's a quote from Steinmetz. Steinmetz said, "If man was endowed with infinite wisdom, he could see an image of the back of his head from every direction." So Steinmetz was referencing the Ouroboros,
Oh,
or the
yeah.
rainbow serpent.
It's no tail, yeah.
Yep, exactly. So Steinmetz also had an obsession with snake venom and the Gila monster. I don't know where Mr. Miller is tonight, but I know. Doesn't he talk about the Gila monster quite a bit? I know Gila's like an old, like 60s, 70s prog rock band that's pretty good too. I think they're from like Arizona or New Mexico or something. They're pretty good. I think that's some good. If you like prog rock, I love prog rock. Anyway, another Steinmetz quote. Steinmetz said, "The scientists of the world will turn their laboratory over to the study of spiritual forces." So he knew what was going on, referring to like runes and all these clandestine secret societies emerging in like the early 1900s. There was an underground newspaper known as The Integrator, which is enlarged the Collaborator, which may have inspired the Shaver mystery. Shaver was said to be a member of the American Communist Party before going into an insane asylum. So he basically went off the deep end, very similar to the case of James Tilly Matthews during the French Revolution. Now, was he a commie? I honestly could care less. So Steinmetz had no descendants, but had a protege, Ernest Alexanderson, who utilized massive electronic motors to create a radio signal utilizing crystal radio receivers. They were wireless. This was used with the piezoelectric effect. And the piezoelectric effect can be observed by combining lead and sulfur with either a tourmaline or quartz crystal. A lot of people will talk about the over-unity effect, and this is when you get more energy output than the energy input. So like self-producing energy. And this is where mercury and silver come in, quicksilver. And this is used to create electric magnetically propelled aircraft. So Tigrock and whatnot. So in terms of secret societies, you would have individuals climb large structures to monitor a gemstone. Polish it, clean it, make sure it's pointing the right direction, usually the southern sky. A Chuda Manikya atop a stupa in Sanskrit. So more recently, these were lowly titles, such as steeplejack or a ruffian, a rough mason, or sometimes more loftily titles such as the King of the World, in reference to Nicholas Roerich and the Chintamani Stone, or Exalted Jewel in Tibetan custom. So you have Paleolithic radio towers that produced etheric energy traveling the same, if not faster, than the speed of light. So, oh, I am radio operator. Right on. Yeah, I got a diagram for a crystal radio oscillator in the back of my mineralogy handbook here. So you have the Frenchman Charles Cross. So we got another Charles.
Yet another.
Charles Cross utilized anti-chromatic filters for his artwork. Transmuting whites, he called it. So he knew about alchemy. Cross utilized 3 colors, red, blue, and yellow. And Cross pleaded with the French government to communicate with aliens on Mars using mirrors. So apparently he thought he could contact extraterrestrial life. Charles Cross also invented the phonograph, but months later, the first patent for audio recording by Thomas Edison would be invented. Charles Cross was an early advocate for memetics, believing the world was a system of symbols expressing metaphysical realities. So, Cross contributed substantially to the symbolist movement in Russia. Pierre Curie's work on radon would be picked up by V.I. Verdansky, who was the architect of the Russian atomic bomb program. So I was like, oh shit, this got really out of hand. So, years later, the Soviets would study orgone, which was coined by William Reich, otherwise known as Brill to the Thule Societies of Germany and the Artemon League and Brill Society. This would become known as bioelectromagnetics in the United States. And this led to MKUltra and COINTELPRO. The Soviets also termed it optical biophysics, with the goal of altering human behavior through microwave radio. So Soviets were up to no good. And this was all taking place in 1926. The Soviets were at this point years ahead of the United States and rivaling soon-to-come Nazi Germany. So, let's get back to alchemy here, not so much this technological travesty. Karl Monk, damn it, another Karl. Karl Monk, M-U-N-C-K, was a studier of Pierre Curie, and he believed ancient monuments are arranged mathematically to form a galactic GPS system. Karl Monk coined the term archaeocryptography, otherwise known as the study of ley lines. While doing this research, I stumbled upon a mineral known as aura-urolites, or aura-marasites. Aura-urolite, it's a lot easier to say. And this is known as the stone of truth and justice, the study of cryogenetics and the works of Laura Lee Mystica. Weird stuff here. I don't know if I would necessarily recommend looking into all this, but I somehow stumbled across it. So, oftentimes we hear the collective consciousness as a term to throw a wrench in the works with all of these normies ignorant towards alchemy. We'll always talk about the collective consciousness without really knowing what we're really talking about here. But in my book here, this is a chapter entitled "We Didn't Start the Fire." No, that's not really. Bad joke. This chapter is actually called "The Guild of Stryers." But Carl Jung, damn it, Carl, is accredited for coining the collective unconscious. However, little do people know that Carl Jung also led to the emblem of the Olympic Games, which were to be hosted in Germany with the first annual carrying of the Olympic flame ceremony. Now, Carl Diem, another Carl,
Another Carl.
Carl Diem, D-I-E-M, is famous for carving the symbol of the Olympics in stone at Delphi in Greece. The rings, we are told, represent the 5 continents of the world, even though there are technically 7, arguing Antarctica and Australia are their own continents. You could also argue that the North Pole itself is a continent. Others cite that the 5 rings are alchemical gold. So the Olympic medaling ceremony itself is an alchemical ritual. The first place medal being gold, or representing the sun. Second place silver, or the moon. And third being bronze. Bronze is an alloy of copper, which in alchemy is Venus. And tin. Bronze is made of copper and tin. Tin is Jupiter. So you have Venus and Jupiter. So therefore you have 5 alchemical elements in each of the metals and 5 rings in the Olympic symbol. So think about copper tone, sunscreen, being a reference to Venus. The use of sunscreen has a direct correlation to the rate of skin cancer, and sunscreen is bad for coral reefs. Remember what I was saying about industrial byproducts being tested on the public for ulterior alchemical purposes?
Yes.
The earth in this sense can be viewed as the heart chakra, and depending on which creed of initiation, Saturn is either the root chakra or the crown chakra. The easiest way to control and manipulate people is to compartmentalize various energy centers. Other planets have alchemical meaning too, such as Mars, the god of war, being the element iron. Now consider this. After the Napoleonic Wars and reintroduction of Olympic ceremony, the Iron Cross would be given to various soldiers of, rank and esteem. And this bears an entirely different meaning in terms of occult alchemy. So you have the Olympians and the Iron Cross. Mercury, of course, being the most self-explanatory of the planets, elements, and alchemy. The Greek Maya is mother to Hermes, which can be a reference to the Taurus constellation, ruled by Venus, and the Pleiades. The Vedic Maya illustrates the Greeks' Eastern inspiration on Western astrology. Hence, you also have the Mayans. You of course have heard of the Nazca crystal caves in Mexico, but in order to understand, you must also know about Aztlan, the island city, and Chiboba, the underground city.
Are they all hot?
The Nazca caves?
No, the ones in Mexico. You can only stay in there for a certain amount of time, right?
Yeah, it's supposed to be scorching hot.
Right. I wonder if they're all hot like that.
All these underground.
Yeah, because normally
caves and
underground caverns are like, they usually sit at like a cooler temperature, at least the ones I've been in.
I think it just depends on if you're like near a subduction zone. I think because you're so close to the San Andreas Fault, it's going to be a lot warmer.
Yeah.
Whereas like other places are dormant, like under the Indian Ocean, out towards like northern Montana. You start looking at like dipoles. Look at the opposite end of the world and where these possible cave entrances lead to.
I think it was just outside of Monterey, and they had, I can't think of the name of the town in Mexico, and they had caverns where you could go in, and they were very cool. That's why I was always confused about why it would be so hot where the crystals were.
For most part, like the caves in the Ozarks, those are stay at like a perfect 68 degrees
Right.
year round. It's just crazy.
That's why I was wondering.
Underground. I mean, it's like being in a basement or an underground apartment. It's always cooler.
So why are the crystal caves so hot though?
They probably have some direct energy store, so you don't see.
Gotta be.
There's just so much
Or
silicate oxide.
Excuse me. Yeah, they're probably conductive.
What a cute.
So anyway, moving on here.
Trying not to blast everyone with a sneeze.
Yeah, it was very cute.
The descendants of, we call this Tiahuanaco, settled the island of Polynesia, the islands of Polynesia, I should say. And they are known for their Waka Papa. And I'm not going to pretend that I understand Maori, but this means genealogy or bloodline of Tiahuanaco, which dates back to like ancient Iran and Babylon, Samaria. And Stanislav Sukowski knew all about these antediluvian societies, and this relates to Puma Punku and the ruins of Tiahuanaco, translated as the Gates of the Sun. Furthermore, ants in South America are notorious for getting their sustenance from the resin of the ayahuasca vine, which contains DMT.
We would like to remind
Whoa, that will trip to me. Bunch of Joe Rogan promos and the Black Pillars.
during arrival and departure.
Little do they know. Bear in mind, Hermes and Prometheus were both born from Maya. And this is where you get the whole stealing of the flame from the heavens myth, along with the Olympic torch ceremony, being associated with trickster gods such as Loki or even ravens in native mythology, which goes back to Odin's ravens, Hugin and Munin, mind and memory, and his blood oath with Loki. A lot of people don't know that Odin made a blood oath with Loki. Mercury rules over Virgo and Gemini, and Venus over Taurus and Libra. So you have the spring and fall equinoxes, which brings about the phrase, reaping the seeds you have sown. Saturn and Jupiter also have multiple ruling planets, but it's classical Aztec, Mayan, ruling class ideology to create wars out of chaos in order to rule over your people. Very, very classical stuff here. So you have 7 total elements in classical alchemy, with Saturn being lead. This is why alchemists have sought to transmute lead to gold. Uranium, at its half-life, becomes lead. You could perhaps attribute minerals to planets, but not pure elements like the 7 classic planets. For instance, Neptune or Poseidon could be sapphire or the color blue. And I would attribute Pluto with perhaps obsidian for its association with Hades and the dead, and crystal mirror scrying. So back to John Dee. John Dee is accredited to having used obsidian from the New World, used by both Aztecs and Mayans. Obsidian was known as Apache tears in the New World. This was most likely made into an alloy of obsidian and quicksilver, that is, silicate oxide, mercury, and silver. Now the exact chemical formula is probably close to this, if not similar to maybe like pewter with nickel or palladium and platinum, where you get the word paladin. And this all varies depending on your rank of initiation. Regardless, you are combining Mercury and Hades, the messenger of the gods, with the lord of the underworld, the first and last of the planets. Now there's a reason Pluto became known as a dwarf planet. It's a reference to Proteus Steinmetz. The stone that the builders rejected has now become the capstone. Hermes, or Mercury, is the only god allowed free reign between the underworld and one of the gods. Hel and Loki in the Norse pantheon give credence to the realm of the underworld. And it all goes back to the blood pact between Odin and Loki, or in biblical terms, the Nephilim or Watchers,
Access to
who the
docking
god
facilities
Heimdallr,
requires flight
or
control
Yurler,
authorization.
safeguards
Please
using the
submit your
Bifrost
request
Rainbow
before
Bridge to
entering the
protect
docking bay.
Midgard, us mortals, from the realm of the giants, the Jotuns, from Jotunheim. It's pretty deep here. So,
This does get pretty deep here. We're talking about some Nephilim business now.
you're getting into the Nephilim here for sure. The Archons, I like to call them. The Nephilim are cannibalistic giants I like to refer as Archons,
In the
imitations
interest
of the
traffic flow
creation of
within the
life,
docking bay,
We're gonna have to have a
we
part
request
two.
that pilots
bone
avoid
of this
blocking access to
Sophia.
docking pads.
So in mineralogy, you have a boule, which is synthesized silicon crystal, not to be confused with George Boole. George Boole was the Irish father of modern calculus, who would also inspire astrologist Cyril Fagan in his concept of sidereal
We would
astrology.
advise pilots to
If you
please show
combine
consideration
Eastern
to
and
fellow
Western
passengers.
zodiacs,
Slow down
research
and
Susan
maintain
White,
a reasonable distance
you
from
also
other
have a
ships
problem
inside
with the
this dock.
Gregorian calendar. April Fool's Day was originally New Year's. So why do we celebrate New Year's at a time of dormancy and death when New Year's is supposed to be a time of, renewal and prosperity, fertility ritual?
Good question.
It's supposed to be at the spring equinox.
Really good question.
So a
This is
bowl
an important
is a
announcement.
synthesized crystal.
Security surveillance
Although
is in effect
isolating
in this
elements
facility
is an
at
ancient
all
practice
times.
of alchemy,
Any detection
this
of
method
chemicals
was
and
invented by
violence
Polish scientist Tom
Right.
Czochralski in 1915. Way to go, Polacks.
My type of people.
Right,
Yeah.
I'm with you. The word bowl itself dates back to Old French and ancient Grecian origins. Bowl can be translated from the ancient form of Greek government,
We would like to
showing
extend
once
a warm
more
welcome
the
to
connection
all
of alchemy
visitors.
through etymology.
Please ensure you
Talisman
complete docking procedures
is a Greek and
in
Arabic
elevated
word following the trail of alchemy and tarot cards, which relates directly to the use of all this symbolism. So I have a whole video on talismanic magic, but I don't want to delve into every little nitty-gritty aspect of it because we're running out of time. But tarot means the royal road back to the Far East. Rishikesh of North India would be a good
This is a
starting
flight
place to start
regulations
looking for
reminder.
answers.
Please
This
do
is
not
very
obstruct the
antediluvian
access
here.
corridor during arrival or departure.
Drink.
Thank you and enjoy
You
your
have
stay.
Marco Polo and James Esdale making a lot of really similar findings in regard to trance-induced ritualism. So, bowls are made from phosphorus ores known as willemite, containing zinc silicate oxide,
We advise commanders to be
and
aware of your
these
speed
ores are
while
used to
securing
create
and
cathode
locking
ray
the sky.
tubes. A cathode ray tube is otherwise known as an electron beam gun, and this is where the advent of colored television and the old projector-style TVs originate. So nowadays we have LCD. Little does anyone know that LCD is liquid crystal display. But similar to Charles Cross and his chromatic filters, these projector-style TVs utilize, with the
Services at
electron
this
beam
starport
gun,
are
3
constantly
colors.
being updated.
Only it was
Remember
red,
to
green, and
visit
blue
every time
to
you
create
pass
all
the
colors
ISS.
of the visible light spectrum. Emphasis on visible light spectrum and the etheric. So to recap, sum this all up here. Boules are synthesized crystals primarily used for producing silicon for various vacuum tube processes till the advent of the transistor radio.
All commanders
which with modern technology led to the advent of circuit boards, microchips, and fiber optics. Now I could go a lot deeper here, but I don't want to freak anyone out. Certain New Age gurus take advantage of these technologies, channeling through the old conceived energy grid system of archaeocryptology or ley lines. So, let's get more modern here. Let's get really modern and let's get this relevant and up to date. Hideo Murai, known as the smartest Japanese man to date, was convinced he was being bombarded by microwave radio technology. Murai sported gold and copper jewelry to counteract the effects of directed energy weapons. Murai was assassinated by a Korean assailant in 1995. He was very much so interested in mineralogy, alchemy, and the antediluvian world.
Drink.
I know. Murai at this time was working on a patent for Kobe steel for submarines of all things. He was also a member of the infamous Shinkarikyo cult, which perhaps relates to the aforementioned Om and use of crystal radio.
Speaking of which,
No, we're not going to do that just yet.
you
So
gotta hurry.
Shoko Asahara was the leader of this cult. Asahara was a yoga and Buddhist practitioner born partially blind, ultimately becoming a cult personality. Shinkarikyo translates as Supreme Truth. Now, this cult utilizes hallucinogenic drugs with a technological twist. The cult recruited Russian engineers with knowledge of acoustic psychocorrection, otherwise known as psychotronic brainwave entrainment. The cult would train in scalding hot baths of water to counter-effect the potential burns of directed energy weapons. So, okay, who's down for some Wim Hof in an ice bath with a Slurpee, followed by a scalding hot bath burning you like a lobster? Let's go to Iceland and train in a hot spring in the mountains. Just saying, people.
Sounds
Just
pretty
saying.
fucked up.
So, was related, or they were renamed to Aleph, and they got a new headquarters in Japan. And you also had an Australian headquarters, whose name I don't quite remember, but examining the etymology, meaning and origin of words, is important. They had a ranch called out in like Banjawarn Station, and an incident occurred the same date as the space shuttle Hoagland was launched. You had plasma orbs in the desert of Australia witnessed, and you had a ranch with sheep used to test sarin gas. Later, this gas was bought up by none other than Saddam Hussein.
Oh.
So you also have the satellite Ginja, which means galaxy, and it was launched to detect gamma ray bursts, but more than likely to forecast black op operations here on Earth. So what you have going on is quantum mechanics and electromagnetic weapons of mass destruction, all in the guise of alternative medicine and healing. Thank you, New Age gurus. So, Shoko Asahara predicted a Shasuo Shinsou, which means a final war, in 1995 between Japan and the United States. Asahara predicted the Kobe earthquake in 1995, signaling the impending war. At this time, historically, you had the early internet and fall of the Berlin Wall, as we all know. But you also had the end of remote viewing operations in the United States military, at least on public record.
Mm.
So you had psychic spies, and they were pretty much just swept under the rug and dissolved, as far as we know. So the sarin gas attacks of the Tokyo subway led to the dissolution of the organization, and it is the only thing the public is told. Asahara has recently been executed, while the cult itself is still active. Japan has done numerous studies on the effects of sound frequency and geometric patterns. What people deem sacred geometry is really just doing everyone a disservice. You have a lot of yoga instructors being assassinated. And this all goes back to a form of Japanese healing known as Reiki, utilizing crystals and their lattice structures to correspond to ley lines. And this is Merkaba and Kabbalah, Sephiroth, astral light bodies aided by the use of crystals and piezoelectric crystal